Cheers, thanks. Yeah. Great. So thanks for coming. It's good to be here. Wasn't that much problem this morning, but it was a bit tighter than I wanted. So this is joint work with Swanadip. I'm always also at Lancaster University, so Swanadip works more on issues to do with corporate governance, corporate finance. I'm more of an applied econometrician on this. So this paper might sound like it's going to be a kind of finance talk, but it's really an applied micro public economics type talk. At least I hope it is. Questions on the way, please get stuck in, tell me what you don't like, etc. So the title of the paper pretty much tells you it's not particularly imaginative title. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to look at female participation on corporate boards and its effect on firm performance. So what's the background here? The obvious point is that share of female employment has gone up dramatically over past decades. This is even true if you look at large firms and look at senior positions. From a low base, it's gone up dramatically. But if you actually look at kind of representation on executive boards, this isn't the case. So there's a number of reasons why people care about this. Obviously, issues to do with just equity and the like are important. But there's, at least since the global financial crisis, there's a view that, at one extreme there was a view pushed in the English press that one of the problems with, they basically looked at the finance sector in the UK, looked at its risk-taking behaviour, the decisions it was making, and correlated that with the fact that there was almost no female representation in senior executive positions, and come up with the idea that maybe women, or at least the involvement of more women in the decision-making would lead to different choices, if not better choices. So there's kind of view generally about diversity behind this, that diversity might lead to at least, the definition, different views being expressed and maybe different choices being taken. And at the same time, the other reason why you might care is that if the reason why there's this kind of difference in female participation rates between upper positions in firms and executive positions is due to discrimination, this might be just inefficient in a kind of standard Vicarian sense. So I'm going to be pretty silent. There's not much in this paper about transmission mechanisms or I'm not going to tell you why women may or may not be better for firm performance. This paper is essentially a measurement paper trying to estimate the effect of gender diversity. Behind this kind of discussion is a whole pile of initiatives that have occurred. The third one is the one which gets all the attention. The mandatory quota system in Norway, where basically all listed firms had to have, as of a certain date, 40% representation. And you'll hear a lot of talk, at least in the UK, about quotas, but they're not really quotas, they're non-binding targets. So basically there's some idea put out in reports that we should go towards 25%. But these aren't binding anyway. There's no kind of sticks or carrots really attached to this. There are other things out there which have occurred in the background. So in the US, there's kind of part of increased reporting of social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, that companies listed firms now have to list diversity in representation and what their policies are, etc. So these things are the background. Norway turns out to be a little bit of it's a distraction in some ways, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a moment, why it's not really so informative for the UK and the US case and the European case more generally that we're going to talk about. So I have to apologise. I should go. Swanadip has a history, a past in consulting. This leads him to occasionally, and us two, to have fights about how many transitions any given slide should have. These two slides are his fault, and I've lost this battle. So let me just do what I'll do, which is click through them all. And then there'll be no more of these after that. So there has been an increase in the proportion of female directors in executive boards. It's more marked in European firms than in US firms, but it's still low. So this is the top 1,500 firms in the US. So in 2006, 11% of directorships were held by women. It's gone up. Kind of percentage terms has gone up, but still not big. And you can look at other measures. If you look at bigger firms, S&P 500 or Fortune 100, it's a bit higher, but not much. If you look at the top 100 firms in Europe, which is the data we're going to use here, these are the biggest 100 listed firms across the European stock markets. Higher base, much more rapid growth, but still not near or anywhere near quality. Next one, we'll click through this one particular bulletin. Yeah, okay. A bit more background. So, one thing to keep in mind is, so we have this kind of proportion going up, but in most firms, particularly in the US and UK, what that really consists of is an increase in firms of having one female director. Right? That's been where most of the action has been. It's been between the 0 and 1 margin. There are a lot of firms which had previously no female directors, and now some have one. So it's not the case that you shouldn't have in your mind that if you looked at the data and distribution, this has been driven by kind of a handful of firms that are female dominated. They basically effectively don't exist. And there's a few other things just to say that kind of growth is out there. So in the US, for instance, 24% of boards have more than one female director. In Europe and UK, there are a lot that have maybe 2. There are not many with 3, with like the sign. It's only get 4, it's basically 0. We're going to talk a little bit about actual involvement in decision making in a second in committees. So you can be on the board, and then additional to that, you can be involved in key committees which make a range of different decisions. So there's audit committees, compensation committees, hiring committees and things like this. So conditional on being on the board, actually in the US, very few females are actually involved in any of these kind of key decision making bodies, whereas in Europe and UK, that's not the case. So roughly, and you'll see in the data in a second, conditional on being the board, there's about a 50-50 chance that a woman is involved with is on some other committee. So we're not the first to think about this by a long shot. This is the kind of most influential paper in the area, Renee Adams and Ferreira in the Journal of Financial Economics. This is the US. So S&P 1500 over a 7-year period. So they do 2 things. First, they just try and look at what happens. So they talk about gender diverse firms. Keep in mind with the US literature, with gender diverse, we really are talking about firms that have 1 woman as opposed to 0 women. Right? And what they do is they go through all the records of all the meetings and see all these kind of different reporting requirements, see whether these firms act differently in some way, whether governance occurs differently. So women attend more meetings. Men attend more meetings when there's a woman present. I don't have a view on that, but that's something they pull out. You know, this literature is very concerned about CEO pay for performance sensitivity and CEO turnover sensitivity. The idea being that this is a signal of better governance. If a firm's CEO is more likely to be kind of fired if things go bad, this indicates there's more kind of monitoring occurring. And there's some evidence in their paper that this turnover is more sensitive to performance if there are female women on the board. But the key take-home message of their paper is that actually gender diversity leads to lower firm performance. So you can say all these things what you want about them potentially being governed better, but if you were trying to put this past shareholders, it doesn't sound like a particularly positive statement if you're trying to push the idea of more female involvement in senior decision making. Ian Gregory Smith, Sheffield, has a few papers in this area. This is the most related one. This is the UK equivalent a few years ago now. So FTSE 350 over a longest time period. A few kind of things in the background. So a lot of female appointments are churn appointments, basically in the sense that they're just replacing a firm or a company loses a female director and they replace that director with another female, right? They're paid less, female directors. It's not kind of surprising. There's not so much discretion there. And they're less likely to have more central roles, as he calls them. The take home here is they have precisely zero effect on firm performance. So he shows quite clearly that it's not just kind of imprecise, that the point estimates of the effect of having a woman on the executive board on firm performance is effectively zero.
So it's common.
Yeah.
Is there much evidence of boards doing anything positive or negative related to firm performance? Because you might think that the board
just doesn't do anything
at all.
Yeah.
So I mean, this may not be a bad. If the board can only screw up, then not screwing up is good.
Yeah, sure. So that's not a particularly negative statement that they have.
Right, and he didn't say it as such. But.
Yeah, that is a negative statement. This one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this literature, again, this is where I wash my hands a little bit. So, corporate governance is not really my area, but there's definitely a big literature on the effect of board size, the effect of board people's attendance. So all these things, so there's a pile of papers out there which try and measure the quality of governance, and they'll go through and they'll look at attendance records and things like this, and they'll look at how well connected these board members are, because they almost always sit on multiple boards. So I think the general view is better attendance is at least correlated with better firm performance, even in the short run. Higher quality boards, by which they mean often better connected boards and things like this, do have effects on firm performance. So it's not like there's just no variance here to explain.
I was wondering about this elaborate firm performance. Your stories of women are more risk averse, then you would expect less variability.
Yeah, sure.
Lower average.
Yeah, so the two kind of big caveats here, you're right to pick up on that, is that, and I led into this myself by talking about the financial crisis, is you might just think you might avoid big negative shocks. The other thing is that you might think that, the test looking at year-on-year performance, which is what all this literature does, and what we'll do, is a harsh test because, to some extent, how much difference do they make in the short run? And some of the arguments might be at least better planning and more stable growth over the long. So you can come up with an argument where there's less volatility, and you come up with an argument where maybe you don't see these returns until over a longer time horizon. So they're fair points, which I don't do anything about, mainly because it's just too difficult to we just don't have the database to estimate these type of effects. Volatility we could do, and we haven't done. I don't know of a literature which really looks at this. This might be mine. I just haven't looked, but I don't recall seeing anything. This is really the starting point in some sense. This is begged around this idea that you can push for gender diversity all you want, but actually it's not good for firms, and hence shareholders won't like it. There's not much story in this about transmission mechanisms of why, but maybe when I discuss this paper it becomes clear what I think some of what Adams and Ferreira have in mind. So this is the paper out there on the Norwegian quota. So the Norwegian quota goes from basically there's some announcement time, of course, but as of that date, there are very harsh sanctions if you do not have 40% women on the board. There's almost universal compliance with this, right? The problem, of course, is, and this is a bit of a problem with work in this area generally, is you don't have nice natural experiments because typically changes in legislation affect everyone. It's not clear to have comparisons here. So the way they get around this is they use pre-quota distance as a kind of IV. Right? So if you're already at 40%, the policy has no effect, and they try and work this distance as a kind of they play around with using that distance from that 40% as an IV, as a source of variation. They find very large negative effects, and these are on short windows. So this type of stuff is basically an announcement effect, so they look at plus or minus 3 days or something to find massive negative effects. So the Adams and Ferreira idea and this is that in some sense, I don't think it tells you so much in this case, because what you're basically saying is even if there was this negative effect, if you suddenly go from a situation where, say, the average is 15 or 20%, and suddenly you have a group, any group, who's been discriminated against, let's say, and have been lacked access to experience in an area, and you suddenly throw them into senior positions by mandate, and then stand back and say, well, look, I told you they weren't any good at it. I don't think it's so interesting. The other reason why it's not so interesting is because these fine folk here have recently released a paper which said if you play around at all with the periods they use and their IV and the like, this result goes to 0. So this is a much more credible paper. It's not published at the moment. I think that's Charles' point. It will be, and basically shows that, coming back to the earlier point, actually, even in this case where you went up to 40, it doesn't look like it had any negative effect on firm performance. In a very short window, though. There's other work out there. I think Maria Bertrand has a paper which tries to look at whether this affected outcomes of female employees within the firm, role model type effects and things like this, whether it led to more chances of getting promoted. I don't think they find much. But we're going to stay very, very narrow here, so that's a big caveat. So what are the shortcomings? I kind of think hammered this point. All this evidence comes from the US and the UK. It's observational evidence. And they're essentially looking for an effect in a setting where there's just no representation. So really, these papers talk about, they have gender diversity in the title, but they really look at the effect of having one woman on the board. So do we expect this to have an effect on firm performance? I don't know. Is that what, if you talk about diversity in decision making, having 1 out of 13 doesn't sound particularly diverse to me. I don't know. But I think the other thing which bothers me a lot about this literature is that it doesn't tell you anything about, the starting point is to say we should have more diverse views in governance, and then we end up looking, because it's easy to measure, at just whether someone's appointed to the board or not. Now, being appointed to the board doesn't actually guarantee much involvement at all in governance, right? It just means that you turn up to maybe a handful of meetings a year as one on end.
Do you distinguish between executive and non-executive?
I don't think so, no. Here, what we actually try to do is we trawl through these things and look at who sits on what boards in the company. So our argument is that, if you just focus on this kind of membership, if we just look at people sitting on boards, this might bias our estimates towards 0. Got a lot of measurement error in there of individuals, basically. Some individuals are there who are involved, and some have just been put on the board in a fairly tokenistic position. This is particularly a case in European settings where, more broadly, board sizes are not fixed, but boards are quite large in Europe. So the cost basically of adding an additional board member is not 0, but it's low. So any kind of move to increase female representation in some way might just lead to the addition of one person on top without changing how anything is run. So what we do is we go to a data set of large European firms. Why this one? Partly because it's a setting where variation in firm board representation is larger than the UK and the US. And then we try and estimate, first off, we try and replicate these studies before. So we use standard measures of board gender diversity, so just percentage of female directors. In the paper we've looked at kind of more discrete versions, it doesn't really change anything. But then we try and look at female director membership on board governance committees. So I'll talk about that in a second. So we're not saying this is the only measure of involvement in governance, but it's something which we can objectively measure and compare across firms and seems a decent first cut at the proxy of involvement. So what do we find? We find positive effects, but they're stronger when they're actually on board committees. We then try, maybe not so successfully, particularly the US, to try, because the worry is, it's interesting, but is it just because we've gone and found a setting where this works, the one setting? So we try and go back to the UK and to some extent the US and see if we can reconcile our results, particularly if we try and take this UK firms and take US firms and look at governance committees. Do we get a different result to the previous literature? A bit of descriptive stats. So this data, I'll call that T there. So this comes to the point of why don't we look at longer run things? We just don't have the data. This is true generally, actually. So we've got 9 years of data here at the moment. I don't know why we've stopped in 2013. We probably should extend it out. We can't go back further. The data's patchy, is the best way of talking about it before then. It's the largest 100 listed firms in the EU, of which the UK is in this time period part of. It's a sore point at the moment, but anyway. It's got a funny sampling approach because they're not balanced. If you're one of the 100 biggest firms in time T, as long as you don't kind of go bankrupt or disappear, you stay in the sample. So the sample kind of increases in cross-sectional observations through the period a little bit. We play around with that. It doesn't change anything much. We dropped out Norway out of this because you might worry about the quota coming in, and here there's only 1 or 2 Norwegian
firms join?
Yeah, at the margin.
Okay.
Yeah, so in other words, if you're the 103rd biggest firm, with T-1,
And then you move up.
yeah. Actually, you made me think. I think then they backfill it as well.
No?
So it's slightly strange. So I mean, so there is actually about 120 firms or 125 firms in this. I think we played around with balanced versions. Doesn't change anything.
Is it mandatory that they have to report it, be included in this if they are in the top 100?
So this is Board X is a independent company who charges a fortune for this. So it's not mandatory.
For the company.
But all this stuff has come from publicly reported information. So it is mandatory in the sense that they have to report to this, whichever stock exchange they're on. And then Board X charges some huge amount of money for us to have this information. So yeah, there's no missing this in here, provided they're publicly listed. Big family firms or things which aren't publicly listed, we won't have. Simple as that. Boring stuff. So we do everything I show you here is going to be return on assets. In the paper we have different output measures, or profitability measures, but that should keep in mind that we really are looking at narrow 1-year returns. 80% of our sample of directors are female directors. This compares with basically double the US and the UK in similar time periods.
That was lower than what you were reporting in your slides.
Yeah, I just saw that and thought,
Closer to the US.
Yeah, there's always someone who picks up. There's a problem with facts. Well, no, it's between two.
I guess okay. You're
in 2004 to 2013. It's some average of that. Plausibly could be 80%. But I will check. There's also a chance that one of the two hasn't been updated. 50% of our sample firms have at least one female director. All right. European boards are bigger, so the percentage is higher and the kind of number is higher, so 3 on average. But just to keep in mind that it's not like a lot of skew in this. So we tried to proxy, this took a bit of legwork. We try and proxy active involvement by looking at committee membership. The problem is not every company has exactly the same committees, but all have some. So there are other committees in the background that you could think of, but these are the ones which are some variant of exists in every firm, right? There's the audit committee, the nomination committee, and the compensation committee, right? The caveats are in some firms, these things might be not separate committees. In most firms, in our sample, there's one of each of these. 61. So what I told you before is that 61% of sample firms have at least one female on these committees. So conditional on being on the board, basically, roughly even chance of being on a committee. So it's pretty close to the average. I won't show too much on it. The kind of underlying heterogeneity is that women are more likely to be on the audit committee, right, for what that's worth. The stories there about more likely to come through accounting streams and things like this. That kind of background. Let's forget about that. So if we compare, just to get an idea what's sitting around the data and give an idea why we need multivariate analysis and to do a few other things, just even on observables, they're not the same. So we compare firms which don't have any female directors to those who have at least one. They are generally different, right? Firms with at least female director are more profitable, have larger board size, have larger committee sizes. That's all I want you to take from that. Empirical approach, that's wrong immediately. That's lagged there, T minus 1. It's kind of basic model to have in the back of your mind, and then we'll talk about the variance we run is this, which is kind of performance in time t, profitability in time t, on starting time, start of that time period's female representation. There'll be different measures of this. Apply the characteristics of the firm, firm fixed effects, time, dummies. So the easiest thing to do is just put firm FE in. One thing that you might have in the back of your mind is that if you're used to using labour data, is that you think, well, we've got CEOs, or we've got directors, and we've got firms. Why not have some of the matched setting? The CEOs will become important in a moment. In practice, CEOs aren't seen in multiple firms. If you're in a big firm and you're a CEO and you leave, you most likely disappear, right? Similarly, with directors, there is some movement in there, and I'll talk about how you can use that, but we're not going to rely on that kind of variation so much. So we're doing everything at a firm level here. There's some summary stats on the firm, summary covariates on the firm, and also on the board. And the first step is just to kind of try and put firm FE in and just knock out basically level differences. So it's a within estimator here. So what it provides is the effect of within firm variation and gender diversity within firm variation of profitability, right? So that's fine as a starting point, but the worry is that you can come up with a million stories where it doesn't tell you anything about why firms are varying gender diversity, and the main concern is that there's something in some shock, something in trends for the firm, some other time varying unobservable, which is leading to this joint decision, right? So this kind of estimate here may not tell us anything about the causal effect if the reason why, I can't probably come up with any one great story, but that firms in different situations, in tough who have shocks, negative shocks or positive shocks, for some reason, as a result, change their diversity policy, change their directorship, which leads to change in gender diversity, change the CEO, things like this. So we need something I would argue, we need something which allows us to get around this, which leads us towards an IV strategy. So one of the problems in this literature again is, well, one, we don't have nice difference in difference type setups. We don't have policy experiments, right? There aren't a lot of instruments out there you can think of either. And this is where we started. We tried to replicate Adams and Ferrer as one. I've given this paper maybe 2 or 3 times now, and I've always struggled to explain this to anyone else. I still don't understand exactly what they do. What they use is overlapping nature of board membership. So I said before that these board members typically sit on different boards, right? In our case, they're sitting on often 1 or 2 or more of these Euro 100, but they also may be sitting on other listed firms who aren't in our sample, so we can pick this up. So we went and found this information up. The idea is that if you're a male director on a given board and you sit on another board and there's a change there in their gender diversity, this exposes you, and it's a good thing, it exposes you to this dose of good governance which comes from seeing that actually gender diversity is good, women are good at decision making, and I come back to my own board then and put pressure on to change the composition within that. This is what Adams and Ferrer use. All in, that in some sense I can live with, but because all in FE, it has to be kind of these within variations. It's not just that you sit on another board and it's more gender diverse. It has to be you sit on another board and it changes, and this leads to rippling on type changes in other boards. So, and that's the identifying assumption. We don't do this because, I don't know, it's an underlying worry about degrees of freedom. I can't think through what's, like there has to be some initial change which works through the system in some way. The other more pragmatic reason is if you run this, and actually, I was at dinner with Renee Adams the other week and she admitted as much. If you run this, it trips all the first stage tests, so it's relevant. If you look at their paper, the point estimate you get at the end, it's signed in the direction you expect. But if I showed it to you, you'd be deeply upset with me because it's the kind of difference in profitability that you should be able to see in the real world with kind of your eyes, because it's 10 or 20 times any variation in the data you get. So it works in the sense that it trips it's a relevant instrument, trips F-tests. You end up with point estimates which are just implausible, and it's very hard for me to think about what the local average treatment effect we're picking up here, or who in the data is generating this variation. And I suspect that's part of the problem in kind of interpreting the second stage results. What do we do? So here's the bit where you get upset or not. Nothing makes an economist more nervous than putting up what my ID slide is. So we rely on this earlier literature in kind of political economics, political economy, and this more recent paper has actually done something similar to us. I'll claim we're original because I didn't know about this paper until I presented this one first, which tries to use variations in family composition, or children's gender composition, and the effect this has on male decision making. So this paper in the AER is US senators and uses variations in whether the senators have daughters or not, and senators who have daughters are more likely to vote for what they call female-friendly legislation.
Did you Oswald this stuff?
Yeah, so Oswald and Nick Powers has a paper as well. Yeah. So there are a few papers out there.
This makes men more conservative.
It's more left wing. Yeah, it's all public economics. That's Oswald and Powers.
Okay.
Okay.
You can hear in this room.
Glad you remember the punchline.
It goes.
So the assumption of this is, right, so we're going to use the same thing. The assumption is that, conditional on a pile of things, child's gender is randomly allocated, but the presence, so that's the kind of exclusion restriction statement, but the presence of the daughter influences attitudes to gender-related issues. So we rely on this, we use this combined with the fact that we basically have no female CEOs, so we throw out female CEOs, all 2 or 3, and focus on male CEO firm observations. Now, what we do is we use the presence of a daughter or at least one female child. We're going to play around and show you robustness later about whether we're really picking up, is this really driving us, and not just fertility driving this or any other type of thing. So we go around, what did we do? Well, we didn't do it. A very nice RA did this for us. You can get a lot of direct information from here, but these are also very public individuals, so you can find out about their family composition quite readily. It's one of the advantages of working with CEO data. So we need it to influence gender diversity, that's a relevance kind of argument. So one of the kind of complaints we get is that, how much power does the CEO have in setting who's on the board? So the boring and kind of econometric argument is that's just a statement about first stage strength. The more serious answer is that they largely define, or they're heavily involved in defining who are the individuals nominated for the directorships, right? And then it's very rare if someone's nominated for them to not get voted in. So our argument is they do have an effect on who gets chosen. We need it not to directly affect firm performance, so you have to believe that there's no other effects coming in here. The other problem is, in a perfect world, what we'd have is we'd observe the decision-making unit we're interested in, the ones making these changes, we'd observe them having children and one turning out to be female and one not, and see how they change behaviour over time. Our CEOs are not young, and their family formation decisions are largely Some do have children in sample, but very few. So they're pre-sorted. So it means it's not identified, our models aren't identified by CEOs having children, they're identified by firms changing CEO, right? And some of those CEOs have daughters and some of them don't, and vice versa in terms of who's leading. So we have 150 turnover events, so you have to be clear it's a local average treatment effect for those where it's a change, so you have to be careful that whether you think you can generalise this to all firms. And so it's only a local average treatment effect for those times when there's a change in daughter. So daughter moves, son, only daughter, only daughters, or only daughters moves don't generate any identification here. It's only kind of changes. And no child or no child. Almost all CEOs in our sample have children, actually. Very few don't have children. What haven't, well, I'll say what can't we do, which more accurately is what haven't we done? We have adoptions. I can't, there's some chance there's some adoptions in there and there's gender selection in that. This previous paper goes a lot of effort to talk about sex selection and abortion and things like this. We don't do anything like that. So you have to accept that this isn't driving our results. That more, one worry could be that more, let's say, how would you put, let's say less chauvinistic, more female orientated, I don't know, CEOs might be more likely to adopt female children. We don't think there's many adoptions in here, may less likely to be involved in gender-orientated sex selection. Many of these family formation decisions were a long time ago, so it's slightly less likely, but still, there's not much we can do about it.
Do you know if they're still parents, or have they split up?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The answer is I'm not sure.
But that doesn't necessarily make you an inactive parent.
True.
I
Might influence your whatever.
I think
female orientation.
Okay.
I think there's an issue that we don't always know if the children are biological children as well. There are things like this. I don't know if there's been divorces in between. When I say I don't know, it's almost certain we could find out if we wanted to spend a lot of time doing it, and maybe we should look at it. This is kind of just a first cut to have a look at. I can't obviously convince you, other than rhetorically, that the exclusion restriction holds, but just a few kind of first things to look at. If we look at these three in the middle are measures of gender diversity. So you just look at CEOs who have no daughters and those who have at least one daughter. They're CEOs of more gender diverse firms. And there's no, these aren't p-values of 0.8, but there's no statistically significant differences on kind of things about firms' size, board size, number of independent directors, and things to do with committee sizes or anything like that, or executives' age. It's a largely, it's kind of a semi-administrative data set, so there is a limit to how much information we have. It's like survey data. So was it
Quite a big effect, like those 3 months in the middle.
Yeah,
When you told me your story, I thought, well, okay, but I'm quite surprised with the size of the effects.
To be honest, I gave this talk with a previous instrument at Lancaster quite a while ago, and Ian Walker piped up and told me, why not use, didn't like my instrument, I was surprised. He, why not try this? And my first thought was, yeah, it sounds like a nice story, but it's not going to have any strength, right? There's not going to be enough variation. It seems to work in that sense. Let me go through some results, because I've run out of time. I promise. I'll go through it. It's kind of fairly straightforward paper from this point. It's the sense in which I meant it was it's a measurement paper in a lot of ways. So let's just go left to right. We just show the OLS just for comparison. This is percentage female on board, just to kind of rest assured that we use the number of women on board or any other kind of measure. This is percentage female on board, conditional on board size, right? So holding board size constant, variations in percentage is what we're looking at. One of the problems with this stuff is, and I don't think we've really kind of nailed this, is effect sizes are not easy to interpret. So you can have relative effect size, you can get the idea of, but we end up having to talk about standard deviation or standard deviation type changes. So OLS 0.023, so no previous study finds a positive effect. If we go to FE, we get very small effects, still statistically significant, and if we go to IV, they're a bit larger. So across all specifications, and that's FEIV I should say, there's a positive effect, positive but probably small effect on profitability of firm representation. I'll show you the first stage of that in a second. You're probably not going to be able to read that, apologies. Standard. Actually, we don't really want this so much. That's just telling you a little bit about what I said before. Women are more likely to be on audit committees, less likely to be in nomination. It's just a bit descriptive. We don't care about that so much. If we boil them up, right, and just treat them as one big committee in some way, and we use percentage of females in these committees for the firm instead of our previous measure, we get larger effects across the board. So this is the sense in which, even a fairly simple attempt at proxying for some kind of involvement in governance leads to doubling the size of magnitude, typically of effects of board diversity on firm performance. So it kind of makes you think, as the criticism of the earlier literature, if you went a step further and tried to find some other way of proxying active involvement, so you could go, if you're minded to, you could get actual attendance in these committees and things like this. This is public information. And try to somehow proxy the extent that women are actually involved in decision making, you might find larger effects again. So that's essentially the take-home message, and modern kind of microeconometrics manner. The rest of it's about robustness and proving you that this is not all kind of made up. So let me go quickly through a few of these things and try and have a bit of a chat. So these are just to show you the first stage equations. So we use the same instrument for both, right? Female on the board, female committees. There's the F-stat. So they're relevant. They lead to large shifts. So even in a multivariate setting, these are linear probability models here.
So it's just having a daughter. Just one will do.
Yeah.
Rather than like this portion of your kids or
No, that's right. So it's just having at least one daughter. So, which is, again, just the way we decided to do it. I don't have a strong view that that's true, but we're going to get, I don't have also a feeling that it's additive in some way. Or
well, it might be increasing.
It could be increasing.
You have 9 daughters out of 10.
I'm sure 9 daughters make more different than 1, but I don't have many of those observations. And,
You might have said this already, but how many of the CEOs are women?
1%. We threw them out.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the advantage of dealing with this data set is, yes, in any other setting, we'd have problems. It would lose a lot of sample because there's no reason to think that a female having a daughter is exactly the same as a male having a daughter. But no, we lost those 3 people. Let me try and remember exactly what we're trying to do here. Let's forget about this. It's just different robustness checks. One thing we're kind of worried about, or I'm worried about, was that we're just picking up is that somehow the more children you have, the more likely you are to have a daughter. And maybe if you're the kind of CEO who has multiple children, you're more productive in a kind of broad sense than someone who has no children. And they're all Yeah, I try to think. I wasn't going to put too much structure on it. So, I forgot about that next one. Actually, this is Swallow-Deep's concern, and other people worry about it, so there's a stopping rule in here as well. So, is it just that you keep going until you have a daughter, or you keep going until you have a son, or anything like this? So, if your firstborn child is a daughter, that doesn't affect how many additional children you have. There's a kind of mechanical relationship here. But it does affect whether you're female or women on the board. I think the next slide, I got myself back to front here, what I was trying to pick up. So children, so we look at, is it just children we're picking up in some way and not daughters? It's just that, and of course the more children you have, the more likely you are to have a daughter. So yes, we can get basically the same point estimate if we just use children, but if we put son and daughter in, it's all coming from the daughter. And here we're just trying to, similar type of idea, controlling for the number of children, so it's not family size per se, it's whether at least one is a daughter. But you're right, it could be. There's no reason why we couldn't do two daughters, 3 daughters. But this seems to work sufficiently without the that additional structure. So at least some of the response you get when you talk to people who work with US and UK data this is, okay, so you found a sample where women are good, but what about, but I'm from the UK and the US and I don't care about Europe more generally. Can you tell me something? Does this hold in our setting? So the answer is kind of. So if we go back to the UK, one advantage we have is the UK firms make up a disproportionate amount of our sample. A lot of the big firms in Europe are UK, well, in the period were, may not be in the future. So if we go to the UK and we run something which is fairly similar to Ian Gregory Smith's stuff, we get something which is fairly close to them. His point estimates, basically 0 effect. If we now use our new proxy, female in committees, we get a positive effect. Not huge, but positive and significant. And this is a very small sample. We could go and run this on and maybe we should go and do this for the FTSE 350. The US story is not so good, and the best I can tell you, so that's the kind of point estimate. These are just FE models, not IV. At the moment, we don't have the daughters for the US, and it's a question of Cronquist and Wu have it. We emailed Cronquist and said, please sir, can we have this information? And he very politely told us no. So he's still working on it. So we're having a bit of debate of whether we go about trying to find that information so we can do the IV of this. But the best I can tell you is that it gets closer to 0. These are very small effects, and the big effects in Adams and Ferreira are driven by their instrument, which I don't necessarily believe so much, and actually they have a reliance on GMM, which gives them point estimates of 700 or something, where we have 3. So it's not a great way to end up. I can't tell you that there is a positive effect for women in committees in the US, but at least when we went and did this again on S&P 500, we couldn't find large negative effects. We found effects which are precisely near 0.
Nobody's point is it's kind of a different question. It's here you're getting, and you also just don't have a variation in committees and such. It's just a lower base.
Sure, that's kind of the point at the start, and that's what I've tried to push in the paper. But we've definitely had referees tell us this. So what if you can't show us it doesn't turn around the US results? We don't care. So that's the question at the moment, is the extent to which we're willing to go and or find the money to get someone else to go and find out about 300 American CEOs, no more than 300, probably 500 American CEOs, children, or not. So no about exactly. The research budgets for. So let me. So this is existing research, is what I end up on. It suggests 0 or even negative effects of credit and diversity on boards. In some sense, I think I took that point earlier. It's not. Maybe it's measuring these things by the wrong kind of metrics, because no one was really arguing that, or at least some of the argument wasn't that somehow this was going to greatly increase short-term profitability of firms. It was going to lead to other better outcomes. But when you actually look at the data and you look at the kind of disconnect between even, the growth in female participation or female employment at top corporate levels in the US has been, I wouldn't say rapid, but it's been marked over the last 20 years, and there's just no evidence that that's filtered up to the next level. So there's a pile of reasons why that could be true. Some of them could be labour supply reasons as well. But if any of that's discrimination, you might think that if kind of good people are being turned down over not as good people, we might see some sort of increase in profitability and better decision making. even putting aside the gender aspect, nothing to do with diversity per se, it's just that this is the basis of discrimination against some group based on membership. The point is with this literature is, you're looking for results in areas where we know there's an issue and where there's no representation, so it's kind of not surprising that we don't find anything. So we go back to this with European data. I think it's a better setting to ask this question, and we also try and look at this kind of, at least a proxy of active involvement. And even just doing this, we find kind of positive effects on third performance in a kind of narrow window, 1 year. And at least, I pushed this a bit hard, with the UK at least, this earlier evidence of zero effect reflects kind of, in part at least, a lack of attention to actual governance and involvement. I think that's it. So,